recommendations would you give to Latin America to carry out the process of generalizing uh, the credit system throughout the region? I imagine that this question is made because I said I don't want to get into in-country issues. There isn't a single answer for this, of course, but it seems to me that we would have to use different levers to make the change. One efficient one that I think is the most important one in Europe was to increase student mobility, because changing one system for another doesn't make any sense unless you have exchange. The greatest interest of the credit system is to be exchangeable. So for this reason, you can sign bilateral agreements among institutions to arrange an exchange of credits in the institutional credit firmly, like a framework, uh, a general agreement, interinstitutional agreement. This would give it an institutional basis. This could be on a broader scale in networks of institutions, and within these agreements to encourage discussion groups of scholars in the same area who exchange students to discuss what we have called, when we practice this, pedagogical contracts regarding students who go and come. A pedagogical contract for those who trade a semester for history in the second year. What is this pedagogical contract going to have? Whatever the minimum requirements are for that semester or the year, the 2 semesters, to be validated in the university of origin. This goes course by course. What is the advantage of this sort of tools, which is one example among many? To organize opportunities for meetings of professors, both to incorporate them into the process so that they can be stakeholders in the process, and in each institution what they would call a Latin American file setting. That is, people interested in Latin America, because these professors, when they take the subsequent steps, because this is important to create these nuclei. And another tool in these agreements would be to consider the degree of competencies acquired by the students, and the meticulously examined contents, what's useful for mobility, is in one exposure to the other setting, and for the study plan, because they can catch up on any content that they missed. We think that it would be useful for Latin America there are many ways to deal with the accredited universities, accredited programs, to accompany the process of exchanging credits and implement this, to evaluate this process and its outcomes. Another essential issue, I think, and perhaps I will ruffle some feathers with this, is to associate the student, representatives of the students, in this process. And the same way that what is a university going to do without the students? You can't give life to a system of transferring credits without taking into account the experience of those who are living it, who are the students. I know that in Latin America there are many discussions about the type of student representation too much democracy, then not enough democracy. The countries have undergone political experiences, and societies have lived through these very different political experiences. But so this we can't create the common process without getting these fundamental prerequisites out of the way. To not discourage people, to not discourage anybody. There are many factors. There one advantage is that in this whole Latin American region, they're just the two main languages. You have the same model of university, so concentrating on the model and the commonalities will be rather than difference will be. So, and you have a common humanistic setting. Your legal systems are very similar, I think. Or rather, looking from outside, they look very similar. You're more sensitive to the differences, but looking from outside, they're very similar, much more than in Europe. And if I may, I was asked a question, so I'll go one step further in the answer. The systems are facing the same threats. The threat to the pressures against universities and higher educational systems has the spacious opposition between professionalization and research, which I think are mutually enriching, and the relative lack or desertion of direct practice of science among the institutions that want to call themselves universities. That is, I hope I don't hurt anybody's feelings, but you're asking me the question. I'm trying to share my reflections. For this process of implementing the exchanging of credits, we have to accept stages that don't match the ideal of the promoters of these systems. For example, the cosmetic stages, that is to dress up something old. There are no better inventors than academicians to cosmetically dress up their systems, to multiply the number of systems and make a cosmetic system of credits. It doesn't matter if it's cosmetic for a certain beginning stage. If it's a stage that we get through, in the next step, then we will incorporate more things. And the system will no longer be only cosmetic. Also to accept, this is embarrassing, I hope we have to accept that the forces of resistance have infinite creativity. Creativity of resistance is infinite, but they will always wear down because the world changes, and in universities we have a massive advantage that we have the students fighting on our side, and they are the forces of the world of tomorrow. So we have to accept the creativity of the forces of resistance, knowing that attrition always wins. Thank you. I have two questions. One has to do with ON, which is becoming less humanistic and more virtual and technological. Well, fortunately, these are two disassociated concepts. Humanism and literary culture is one thing, and the other thing is the system by which one shares knowledge, transfers knowledge, or conveys knowledge. So this is one. I'd like to say the following. The truth is that for many years now, this separation between what's called scientific and technological knowledge and literary or humanistic knowledge has been overcome. Precisely the new technologies are those that have enabled us to overcome that. When we talk about systems, It's an aspect, it's the same language as mathematics or the language that we use in communication in our everyday expression. So I think what we've done is simply to attempt to enable the university where I work has a major literary tradition and also a scientific tradition. The best treatises in medicine were from my university in dissemination of knowledge. And Rodinger did the mechanics of repetitorship in our university that said that wasn't science, but we've used a system that's open. And I think my rectorate, when it gets organized, will be that of open to being on the network all the time, to use all of our resources, because I think this is the obligation of the university to do what we can, everything that we can, to be global. So we are it's not that we're no longer humanistic. I think we've increased the literary culture and literary knowledge greatly, but I think that science and technology is also culture. Let's not forget that. Sometimes people forget that it's cultural too. From your standpoint and experience, how, what do you know about Ecuadorian universities? I've come here to talk about knowledge management, and the truth is that I have, if I may, very little experience with Ecuadorian universities. I'm familiar with this one, but I think that when at one point in my life, I audited university. Auditing is an important factor. It's a marvelous thing because I think that to speak accurately about something, you have to be familiar with it. So we have to know about the inputs and the knowledge that are generated, how it's considered internationally, the student that they educate, and how is the graduates. Because without knowing that, it's hard to give an opinion. I know something about this university, and I can't know if this is a university that's an example. I think it's well adapted to the local territory, which is fundamental for a university. Secondly, it has technological park development that's very interesting. You know better than I do, but I think it's very significant what's been done. The budget compared to what you do, I won't tell you about the budget, but what they've told me is that I think they're very effective. I'm just giving it as an example. And one thing that I think is significant is that the doctorate system is shared time. One thing is that as you're well known worldwide, and the taxi driver that I took to go to the airport in Quito, he said, "You're going to the university in Loja?" He said, "It's a good university." And I think that's good brand recognition. So I think that it's good. Any university that considers it is self-respecting, I think that it's very important to have professors of talent management. We haven't talked about this. Everybody talks about it. Management of talent has is a very important issue. More than we're not managing talent, not just a payroll, but I think any university that wants to be good should spend money, a little money, because it costs almost nothing to do audits, ongoing audits of everything they do. My people who have some experience can give very positive results. We are putting the mirror up in front and say, look, you're spending on this, and this isn't getting results. I think this university, for example, has a distance education system that I visit that is efficient and innovative organization because the tutors have schools. Well, listen, maybe you have to reorganize differently. One of the objectives, one of the slides I put in, that we don't have to continue with the same model always of dividing up into departments. This is classical in universities. Maybe in a graduate program it doesn't make any point. There's no point anymore. We have to think about new things, and this university has been thinking about that, and I think they're doing a good job. And in any event, I can't say much more because if I don't measure it and weigh it, what I can't measure and weigh, I can't give an opinion. Jose Luis Pino has a question too. I have a statement and a question. The statement is engineers and doctors don't agree with the Bologna process, and they say, don't you? Don't you think that the others are losing quality in their studies? This is an example of the imagination, what we just heard, that the resistant have infinite creativity. Here there are two statements that we can't figure out where they got it from. The, the doctors in Europe have an active life, and if they, if there's any agreement about what a doctor should be, that's in medicine. I don't know where they got that. In engineers, the Bologna process has nothing to do with it. Everybody says that they support it because in Spain, there's a peculiar thing that there were technical and higher education engineers, and the discussion is who has the professional privileges, the technical or higher engineers, when we don't have technical, but we have the undergraduate and the masters. The technicians are very happy, and the higher ones are very unhappy. So this would be a summary of the situation. But I think also there's an agreement that the master has to have a series of powers in one area, and so it's not true that today there's opposition to the tactic of implementation of the degree granting. If we are in such a hurry we've had 11 years to plan the beginning of the new education, and we're just beginning. It's all relative, but if we look at the life of a professor, that 11 years is, and so the learning of students to improve the students' job employability, to improve research. If these are things that are going to worsen quality, then the resistants have infinite imagination. Thank you, Jose Luis. And then also, Arturo Jimenez has one too. I have a question, and to answer it, I'd like to begin by trying to wash my hands of a sin of omission. I tried to give the information quickly. And with this, we have the question, which is what is the influence of the decisions of the Parliament on the member states if the states are committed to the work together? What I'd like to clarify is that in world history of planning development, whenever we identify and then formulate and then implement a plan, program, or project in any setting, it has to be evaluated. The financial evaluation, the social or environmental evaluation, the environmental assessment has taken time over the 70s to get its role, and now nobody does any plan, program, or project with technical or financial support if it doesn't have good results on the environmental assessment. The incredible thing is that so far today, this has all been done without taking into account the cultural impacts of the plans or projects. With UNESCO, we're promoting then for the environmental assessment, financial, and so on, to add in a cultural assessment of the plans, programs, and projects. And the document should have all the conceptual and methodological concepts. It's available on the Parliament's parlatino.org in the network of parliamentarians with the Education for All of UNESCO, which is the parlared.org. And one thing that we proposed in all of the fora, and we're talking about motherhood or chickens, we have to talk about this project. We have to raise consciousness, especially in Ecuador, where an illustrious person from Loja, that Benjamin Carrion, says that Ecuador can be a cultural power, a pilot in cultural evaluation. At least in a meeting of parliamentarians, at least they can hear from the international agencies the latest news about the subject that they're discussing. They hear from their peers what's going on in each country, and they say what's happening in their own country. That's the very least. But they never settle for that. Each commission of parliamentarians has sub-commissions and working groups, strong liaisons. For example, the Human Rights Commission has a subcommission of complaints that links directly to the Inter-American Human Rights Commission and all of these agencies, the legal human rights bodies. So the parliamentarians, the decisions of a Latino are not binding, but they do establish formal commitments to do their activities. As a consequence of the activities of the Parliament, I'll tell you quickly, there have been constitutional amendments in several countries of Latin America. This proposed law of cultural evaluation plans, programs, and projects as a consequence of the promotion by the Latin American Parliament is being carried out in Mexico, and it was approved by the Senate, by the Chamber, and is to be signed by the President. It will probably be the first country in the world to modify their planning laws to incorporate cultural assessment. We're not doing any specific activity to have binding activities until we take a prior step, which is the formal constitution through an international treaty of the Latin American Community of Nations. It would be to put the cart before the horses. And in other regional parliaments that they tried to get to that point prematurely, and they've had serious implementation issues. We remain effective, efficient, and we hope that when the community of Latin American nations, that the parliament of that community will be the Latin American Parliament. We'd like to thank our speakers for the brilliant participation. Thank you all for your time. So then we'll conclude this session number 5 and invite you to the next session starting at 11:30 this morning. We're going to have a 15-minute coffee break in the halls and lobby of the convention center. They'll be serving coffee. 15 minutes, please. We'll be back at 11:30.